Very excited to have with us Captain Tony Batera, Information Warfare Commander for Carrier Strike Group 1. Tony's a University of Virginia graduate, also went to the Naval War College, started his time in the Navy as a SWO, like many of us did. Also part of the Navy Space Cadre, which is one of the few and mighty. He's had tours in the Pacific Fleet, Strategic Command, CIA, Joint Staff, Joint Intelligence Center Pacific. He's also the prestigious recipient of a couple of the community's top awards, the Edwin Taylor Award for Leadership and Mentorship, and the Rufus Taylor Award for Leadership. I think I got those right. So I'm not going to drone anymore. He's just come off a good deployment, and he's going to tell us about his experiences as the IWC afloat. Tony, over to you.
Well, good morning. I'm standing between you and lunch, and more importantly, Admiral Paparo speaking, so I will try to be brief, but I'll mention an operational deception plan later in my remarks. Joe, thanks for introducing me. Thanks to the Naval Institute and AFCEA for holding this conference. I'm a veteran of speaking at AFCEA conferences in Hawaii. I spoke at 2 TechNet conferences. However, I was very comfortable speaking about the other guys, the Chinese Communist Party, their projection into the maritime environs, and their work in the gray zone. I did that once on the PAC Fleet staff with Admiral Studeman at my side, so I couldn't possibly screw up, and once as the Special Operations Command Pacific J2, talking about ISIS in the Asia Pacific. So after 5 tours in the Indo-Pacific, I'm comfortable talking about our adversaries in that region. But today, the IW senior leadership asked me to talk about the Vincent Strike Group deployment and the role of information warfare in our operations. So before I begin, let me remind you that I am a backup speaker. Having just returned from deployment on Monday, stepping into Admiral Bill Chase's large and more learned shoes, I am mindful to balance my time and remarks with time allocated for Q&A. I did have a thought, though, as I prepared these comments. The longer that I talk, the less time you all have for questions. So you'll have to decide if I'm just a talkative person or if it's an operational deception plan to avoid the Q&A. Likewise, as a backup speaker, I'm mindful that I followed the TICOM commander that mans, trains, and equips our forces. And later today, the IW force provider, the capability deliverer, if you will, SPAWAR, will speak. So I'm sandwiched between those two. It is important that I remember the 3 B's of public speaking. Be brief, be gone, and above all, behave. So for those of you that are expecting a different B, i.e. be brilliant, I will tell you probably not so much. We'll see. I will tell you what we did on cruise, how IW as a mission performed during that cruise, and I will offer what I would call some get real and get better moments. If you're not familiar with the CNOs, with Admiral Select Hines in the audience, I would say ethos. It's an ethos to be frank about what we're doing well and what we're not doing well, and then how do we improve it. So I will provide some get real, and that's a bit of a that's a victory lap, if you will. We did some really great things that we as OpNav staff, the numbered fleets, the SysComs, the TICOMs, the collective Navy, and our technical industry partners can take solace in. However, that same problem-solving collective has to do some self-reflection, some self-correction to get to what the CNO calls a culture of consistent improvement. What I'm used to is saying high-performing teams. So let's recap the deployment. So for the Naval Institute, I have to laud them and their news articles. They pretty much covered all the high points. So if you just want to go to your phones and read that and tune me out, that's fine. You can read about our Defense of the Homeland mission in June when we essentially surge deployed, and we really adapted our training cycle to go to the Hawaiian operations area in lieu of Southern California. And the purpose of that was not only to train, but to deny unfettered access and water space to the Russian Federation Navy ships that chose to hang out in that area. So not on our watch is what we said, and that was a successful first part of our deployment. You can read about large-scale exercise, which was in August of last year, an event that culminated in precision strikes with live ordnance that sunk the U.S. the ex-USS Ingram. There were also 7 allied or partner engagements we conducted between September and December in the Philippine Sea, the South China Sea, the Bay of Bengal, and the waters off Western Australia. We found that our sisters and brothers in arms were eager for more high-end warfare training and realistic operations. I'll talk about that a little bit at the end. We can also look at some of the open source articles where we reminisce about working in purely naval operations, an expeditionary strike force in December and early January with USS Essex. And more interestingly, the Joint Integrated Maritime Fires Construct, something we flexed in Noble Jaguar, where we shared targeting data with the 3rd Marine Division, sometimes yielding command and control of maritime targeting to the Marines ashore. That's a sea change. In all, VINSG Strike Group steamed more than 80,000 miles, conducted 6 South China Sea transits, and 2 Strait of Malacca transit. We achieved a 91% operations tempo, and one statistic I saw had us ashore for only 17 days since the 7th of June. I enjoyed my Chick-fil-A 2 days ago, by the way. On cruise, we hosted the CNO twice, the Indo-PACOM Commander twice, and the Pac Fleet Commander once, as well as the Indian CNO. Our longest stint at sea was 72 days, breaking my personal best of 55. We were the first long-dwell deployment to 7th Fleet, and while I give props to TR Strike Group for their 2nd phase deployment in 2020, which stayed exclusively in 7th Fleet, our Carrier Strike Group's deployment was purpose-built for 7th Fleet after the 5th Fleet tasking to support Afghanistan was revoked. My Strike Group commander mentioned in an article just yesterday that for many in the Navy, remaining exclusively in 7th Fleet was a paradigm shift. Discussion of ordnance men remarking that it's not usual for them to come back to port or to offload in the 3rd Fleet, 7th Fleet line with full magazines. But that's a part of integrated deterrence and strategic competition. The main feature of our deployment, however, was all about the air wing of the future, its capabilities, and how we in information warfare and the other warfare commanders applied its lethality and survivability to deny, defend, and dominate in the Indo-Pacific. We had a lot of help from warfare commander peers. Our Sea Combat Commander was Destroyer Squadron Run. Our Air Warfare Commander was the CO of Lake Champlain. And with them, the IW Syndicate set about making the air wing of the future operationalized, bringing about capabilities brought on board by Carrier Air Wing 2, Team Broadsword. And we developed a shared responsibility. It was our intent to involve the air wing, the capabilities that they brought, into something better. We all had turns as the supported commander, flexing the improved EA-18 Growler, the E-2D, the 5th generation fighter F-35 Lightning, and the CVM-22 Osprey. Through it all, the Carrier Air Wing commander refined his tactics and procedures with input from the 3 of us, and of course the Carrier CO, as well as our SMEs. The F-35, for example, operating in tandem with the Growlers is a potent combination, especially for an information warfare commander. Capitalizing on range, stealth, and measuring and evaluating its simulated lethality, CAG Commodore and I were constantly seeking to optimize realistic conditions and test his people and machines, all while stressing each platform's connectivity and IW capability. At the same time, the Carrier CO and his team tirelessly experimented with deck density. If you heard the Air Warfare Commander speak in the TICOM platform, he talked about deck density. We had extra E2, extra Growlers, and of course the F-35s, as well as the CVM-22s. So the bottom line with Air Wing of the Future for me as an IWC, it was amazing to experience and a privilege to watch them all operate. Team Broadsword was superbly led with brilliant tactics. All that said, and I'm a SWO at heart, it's sure fun to wear a flight suit and go Mach 2 with your hair on fire, right, Witz? But there was some equally amazing work. That was a Top Gun quote if you don't, the uninitiated. I don't owe you $5 because I'm not a bro. Some equally amazing work, other than the flying, was done in the mission planning spaces. Days before those jets took off, or we even thought about being spotted on the flight deck. We are excited to bring back the lessons learned from the first Air Wing of the Future deployment and share them with the fleet and the warfare development centers. Okay, so let's tie this all back to the IW evolution. As promised, here are some get real evaluations of IW during our cruise. This is that self-reflection part. There are some things we are doing well and should sustain. First, let me be clear and say the era of discovery, if IW is a thing that should be at sea and afloat in the form of a commander and a syndicate, is over. IW is not an outliner. We are at the center of all the events. We are synonymous with high-end warfare. I think we are on our third iteration of IWCs assigned to Carrier Strike Group staffs. Some are in the audience. I'll let you figure out which group you belong to. The first group had to literally fight to get to the table, a job that had been a collateral duty for the ship CO or maybe an O5, either integrated fires officer or N6. That was the scrounge phase, if you will. I didn't give them names in my speech. I think I just made that up. The second was engaging fellow warfare commanders in what some would call healthy friction. Why are you at the table? I think coming out of that phase, there were a lot of realizations. There was a lot more flag officer buy-in across the flag mess, and we are where we are now. On my deployment, it was a band of brothers, a league of men and women that understood that information warfare is high-end warfare. So what that meant is it allowed us to go down to one more level down. So now that IW is permeated down to the strike leads, to the tactical action officers, to the battle watches, and most importantly, tactical action officers. As a veteran of 8 airplane cartoons, however, I had to remind myself that there's no such thing as bad publicity. So from the basic phase off of SoCal to high-end warfare training with our Australian partners off Australia, I think it was our CNA embedded analyst, a wonderful human in her own right, that observed, you know, at times you're really the integration warfare commander. You bring people together that didn't know they needed to be connected. It made me think of Malcolm Gladwell and his book, The Tipping Point, where he talks about connectors and mavens. Another author, Josh Ramo, who's a promoter of networks, talks about connection changing the nature of an object or a person. I think in IW, we help people see the second and third order effects of tactical actions, first without IW planning. And that meeting usually ends with, oh, now I see why you and your syndicate are here. Speaking of which, I should mention what I mean by an IW syndicate. In Vincent Strike Group, we operated the 3 pillars of IW as independent enterprises. Their leaders, having been milestone screened, which is an information warfare term, are to me equivalent to 05 COs of a DDG. They are there for a reason. They are running their enterprises. So how was I to align and essentially drive operational control, or OPCON, of these enterprises to deliver IW readiness and effects to the CSG commander, my peers, and the numbered fleet? I reviewed a team of teams approach and considered the concept of a syndicate. A syndicate, loosely defined, is similar or like-minded enterprises all aligned for a common purpose. In our case, Battle Space Awareness Enterprise, the Assured Command and Control Enterprise, and the Integrated Fires Enterprise came together to form a syndicate, and the name stuck. Another get real and a good, to use COM2X parlance, was the Warfare Commander's laptop. This was a guidance and command and control process we started after COM2X, and I think it's something the Warfare Development Centers need to study. It involved getting all the warfare commanders buy-in for an operation, activity, or investment. Largely focused on simulated long-range maritime strike, each warfare commander was able to add early in the process his specific element or addition. The Army would call these branch plans. Is it an MCON launch? What if the long-range bombers come out just when the Striker and fighter escorts are at their farthest point? What does the submarine picture look like? What does it look like now, and what does it look like when we're ready to launch the jets? I credit our CAG to opening this process and letting others in. Here's where, and you've heard Admiral Ashback and Admiral Vernaza talk about the value of the WITI program, Weapons Tactics Instructors. That program paid for itself as far as I'm concerned on our cruise. Once we let that one IW WITI in, combined with METOC and the Intel team, the planners couldn't get enough. It was viral. So IW is more than baked in. It is a part of naval warfare now. as normal as GQ or the smell of haze gray paint combined with pancakes. I know that SMIDC, NAUTIC, and NIWC are spending a lot of time in each other's buildings. This is just carrying it down to the CSG level. Let's talk about innovation in data systems. In a much smaller scale than Station Hypo, in Vincent Strike Group, we took risks and borrowed time to have a contract to fail, as they say in Silicon Valley. That's because innovation knows no rank or requirements process. In the CSG, as IW professionals, we have to be these people. We have to lead that type of innovation. The role of data science and data fluency and giving time and space to local coders is critical. We viewed innovation as taking something the Navy had already bought and paid for, or perhaps the intelligence community had bought and paid for. They've given it to us, and we make it better. So this is both a get real or good example, but it's also a gotta get better. The CNO has encouraged us to empower our people to find and fix problems and innovate at the lowest competent level. We did just that. We empowered a group of willing sailors using coding knowledge that they had to grow that into a team with a DevOps culture, bringing in some sailors with interest but no coding experience. This is something of which I've been a champion in 2 tours with Special Operations and 2 tours at the Pacific Fleet, one as its Director of Intelligence and Information Operations. At the CSG level, with the support of an incredible NGA partner on board, we fostered the culture of a startup. We asked ourselves, what did we hate in our daily IW work? What could we make more efficient? The result was no less than 7 tools, mostly centered around battle space awareness, so mostly METOC and Intel, all sailor developed, no khakis involved. We sent those tools to I4 and NGA for further development and evaluation with the expectation that they'll be disseminated to the fleet. One of the things I tried to evoke was the best tool, that coder got a hoodie. That didn't take. Another thing that's a good is just being comfortable in our own skin as information warfare officers. What that means, as terrifying as it is sometimes, is talking in the media and to the media. Sometimes just doing our job was the news, especially when we did it with trusted allies and partners like the Quad. At a previous panel yesterday, I4 mentioned the Navy had released a few tactical memos or tech memos to our allies and partners. I can tell you this has been game-changing. With the Japanese in particular, it was instrumental in achieving a new level of cooperation. And I have been supporting IW exchanges since 1999, so I have a frame of reference on that. That sharing is based on trust. And we are merely extending to afloat units the work that NIWC is doing with the Japanese, bringing IW to our allies, like the Indians, the Japanese, and others. I'm also aware that the Queen Elizabeth, when she sailed, had an IWC on board from the UK. I was on the record in press releases talking about IW and its role in the Indo-Pacific. More importantly, so was the Japanese commander and his staff during the exercises. That probably wouldn't have been the case 2 or 3 years ago. Much like the CVNCO or the CAG, the new thing was the IW syndicate. We were making the news. Why is that important? Because not only is it an IW recruiting tool for the digital natives that have come after us, but as important, if not more important, our friends take notice of the role of information warfare, and equally important, our strategic competitors. As our team studies the risk of smartly removing barriers to information sharing, in particular to Quad nations, our collective proficiency improves, and that leads to greater teamwork and ultimately greater lethality. That should scare a lot of strategic competitors in our AOR. Okay, so now let's remove some rose-colored glasses to see what I think Vincent and the teams that come after us can do to advance information warfare capabilities. We have to get better. We must be a continually learning and improving organization. First, let's go back to data science. If every Marine trains to be an expert with a weapon, should not every IW professional have some expertise in data science? What is our role as IW leaders in creating a space for that? In the CSG, I mentioned we had some local coders. Is that something we should consider more broadly? How does that pair with Overmatch? You'll hear about that this afternoon. This type of capability is already being fostered in pockets around the Navy. It is work in aircraft optimization, as you heard from Admiral Weitzel yesterday, and is being fostered in other places like Station Hypo. While it would be nice to do this work remotely, we need an in extremis capability on board to do it. How do we grow that talent? We have great programs for officers to take 1 to 2 years out to learn to be part of industry, to embed with the technically innovative firms that are building the Navy. In fact, I had an exchange, an IM exchange with one of the lieutenants I worked with previously, and I asked him where he was, and he told me he's on one of these exchange programs. And when he explained what he did and where he worked, it was a rocket company. I replied in the IM, so basically it's like you work at Stark Industries and you were that lieutenant colonel that became the war machine. He replied, heck yeah. He didn't say heck, but you get it. So what about a program for other folks in the Navy, not just the officers? What about qualified technologists of every rank? If you're a SWO, and indulge me in the SWO analogy, shore intermediate maintenance activity. If you think about the SIMAs used to influence the careers of an E5 fresh from sea duty, their ratings, they'd take an E5 fresh from their first tour, and they would rotate into these intermediate maintenance facilities, and they would sit at the feet of master tradesmen, people that have been fixing pumps, working on electrical boxes for 25 years. Imagine if half the industry partners at this conference could become a corporate SIMA equivalent. An AWS, a Splunk, maybe with a NAVWAR mentor, but it would be an amazing program, just like SkillBridge. The difference is we get the sailors back. So Ms. North, I-4 West director, mentioned yesterday on the stage a readiness dashboard that she had discussed with our team. If Andrew's here, Lieutenant Belding, he drove hard and fast, and I don't think we got there. But if we had a program like this, could we hand it to a squared away E5, E6, or I don't know, Chief Jackson over there from Vinson's probably chomping at the bit to join. Could he come back with that dashboard in 6 months? I think that we could, for a fraction of the cost, deliver that. You have to remember, as Mrs. North also said, this is a completely digital generation that's coming up. They don't remember an era before cell phones, or excuse me, an era before smartphones. They are the talent pool, and they have what it takes to get better. Okay, another get better idea. Let us see about the visual spectrum. Let's talk a moment about maritime ISR, and I'm going to blend SOCOM and Navy culture. I apologize in advance. I don't think that the visual spectrum, pictures, imagery, ISAR, has an equal role among the Navy missions in the CWC construct. Maybe it should. There are both short-term and long-term impacts of not having the visual sensors and relays optimized to their fullest extent. Like VI, or visual information in the fleet, MISR as a mission lives between public affairs, the Sea Combat Commander, and the IWC, not necessarily in that order. In Vinson, we enjoyed the expertise of what is called a Maritime ISR Expert Afloat, or MISR-A. We often debated the scope of his responsibilities. He is supposed to be an operator, a collections operation manager. I had him get into the systems parts of the connectivity of what makes his systems work, or in some cases not work. I'm not sure we've garnered all the lessons learned about ISR systems from what we call the Global War on Terror, or GWOT. How about from CENTCOM and SOCOM? We have to see how the stealth, the EABO, and overhead can combine to make us more aware. I'm fully aware, after 5 tours in the Pacific, that this is not the GWOT. Our systems have to be hardened, they have to be different waveforms, and they have to be capable of operating in a comms-denied environment. But right now, we have to make sure the systems and the platforms that we have can talk to each other. That might mean putting rice bowls aside and optimizing the picture for the CSG commander, me, and the other supported warfare commanders. In the longer term, it's vital as we talk about sensing dark targets. I often said in my last job, no matter whether they're cooperative or not, they're still made of metal. I read a lot of intelligence, but I'm pretty sure peer competitors don't have tactical cloaking devices. I bet I can find them with the right sensors and the comm links and get that to the CSG. A combination of space, long and medium range UAS, not just airborne, or from an EABO that no one knows about just yet. So finally, I spoke about a holistic CSG process in the warfare commander's laptop, and I claimed that as an IW win, but it made me look harder at our own processes as an IW syndicate and as an IW community. What are the IW processes at the CSG level? This year as a Navy, we celebrate the centennial of the aircraft carrier. Carrier aviation can look back on a lot of air planning boards, air plans, and yes, airplane cartoons. I must admit I'm a little jealous. We, the IW community, are just 12 years old. How evolved was naval aviation in 1934? What are our processes at the CSG level? We need, in concert with the other warfare development centers, to develop these processes and figure out what software we need to mass produce them. It has to be inculcated in our battle rhythm, at sea, and in the mocks, most importantly, and in our schoolhouses. I think these processes need to be developed around the concept of fusion. After all, IW is about fusion. What is our process to deliver IW effects and enable others? Our answer in the Vincent Strike Group was to experiment with an IW command center. This was a good, and I'm proud of it, but it needs to get better. Admiral Ashback earlier talked about if you've been on one carrier, you know and understand the information warfare on that carrier. Every space is different, every CSG is different, and that's something that we should try to change. For Vincent, an IW command center was a term and a place on a CVN that initially evoked futuristic images of a movie-like tactical operations center. But really, it just became a space to gather and fuse data with the limited feeds that we were able to stitch together. You could call it an IW CIC, an IW Ready Room, a JOC, or just a fusion center. It served as all those places. For me, it was more than an office space, but just short of a watch station. It makes me think of George Carlin. It was a place for our stuff. If you listen to Miss North's comments yesterday here as well, this is where that dashboard would go and be displayed, where we'd monitor what I think is a great suggestion, an IOS, an information warfare operating sequencing system like CSOS or EOS, if you know your SWOs. Just as CAG and the CVN CO go to CATSI, or a chief engineer surveys central control, and they know their domain, they understand what is happening in their warfare area. This is also where perhaps a video editor or the miser, whether it's a person or software, would be housed to watch all the visual information feeds that are available. And this is where, during times of increased readiness, the spectrum manager and the electronic warfare officer would gather to advise me on force monitoring and recommended changes to our AC2 plan. As important to me, this was also a cruise in which we built some culture around the IWCC. Focused on the IW leadership, those milestone officers I mentioned, that culture helped in turn drive IW operations, which had the knock-on effect of permeating across other warfare areas. When I told one senior that I was speaking today, he advised me to gargle with honey before speaking. I have to balance that admonition with Ms. North's comments yesterday. To be in the fleet means to never be satisfied. I'm aligned with both sentiments because ultimately I believe that a leader, IWC or otherwise, is a dealer of hope. We did some amazing things as an IW syndicate, and we are proud of them. We are hopeful that our contribution to integrated deterrence moved the needle while we were there. 4 days back in the United States, it does taste sweet to have sailed with our IW syndicate and accomplished our mission. We worked with some amazing partners and trained them in new warfare areas at sea. We garnered the attention of peer competitors and learned a lot about them in the process of watching them watch us. We also furthered the IW mission, and as a culture across the CSG, permeated it down to the TAO, the 04, maybe not the 03 level, but getting close level. We leverage the air wing of the future and have plans to get better with its capabilities in several IW domains like data science and visual battlespace awareness, and making progress towards a command center. We are and must remain a learning organization. After all, it's only 1934. I stand by for your questions, if we have time. I'm kidding. I don't. Oh, no.
Yeah, Captain Bater. Robert Woodsup, a question for you. I noted with enthusiasm your discussion about your CNA reps describing you as the integration warfare commander. and your talk about where you did your watch standing in your IWC space. And so it seems to me one of your primary responsibilities to the strike group commander was to integrate information across the strike group and the other warfare commanders. If that watch standing space that does that for the strike group commander is TFCC, I'm curious on your thoughts. If you accept that TFCC is not a fist, it's a brain, what are your thoughts on that being your warfare center? And how does subplot fit into that as combined space to be the information warfare commander, integrator across the entire strike group?
Good question, Witz, and thank you. A lot of the programmatics here, I think the simple answer is you blow the doors off, and those four spaces, briefing analysis, subplot, an IWCC, and a TFCC are a SCIF. Now that's one way to go. I will tell you that the other things that have evolved in TFCC land is we did have our Quebec watchstander and the Papa watchstander now in TFCC. So we had, essentially, again, the SOCOM equivalent is an LNO on that watch floor. And I spent as much time in TFCC as I did in IWCC. In fact, I think our guys would say more, because the systems and the integration just wasn't there. We got a T-SCIF halfway through cruise, which made it more interesting to stay in that space. But that's why we call it an experiment. Again, to get real, get better, experiment. I didn't, proof of concept with some potential to, and I'm going to put Ms. North on the spot and ask, we did significant input to an Air 4, I-4 Spaces letter, and that's an initiative to address. The challenge is all the carriers are built differently, and so there's no snap the chalk line and, all right, we're going to do it this way. The Zulu mod had the same history. We have to go back and look at SURF 4. In general, though, that command center was aspirational in some evolutions and brilliant in others. But we still had that presence in Charlie, Quebec. And again, having Papa and Quebec in there made it loud sometimes. I think another thing about command centers that I thought was interesting is we talk about in SWO world the khaki fire drill, right? It seems strange that the CAG and I and sometimes the Commodore, who'd leave the Zulu module, all would gather in TFCC and not really a place to sit. Places I've seen in SOCOM, there's a little glass fishbowl. We don't want the 06s or maybe the 1-star mucking around with the watchstanders. You know anything about space and mission control, they don't put, Werner von Braun down in the front row. They put those guys in the men and women in the back. So anyway, that's my thoughts on command and control at the strike group level.
Skipper, this is Jim Harkins, former Marine, but this may not be in your wheelhouse today, but you were talking about speaking to the media, et cetera, and I'm not the media, but I am a curious Marine. Can you share anything with us about the F-35 Charlie that went down in the South China Sea? And I understand if it's not in your wheelhouse.
I can tell you what I, as the IWC, thought was important after the event. In regard to the investigations or what happened leading up to that, I'm not at liberty or I don't have the knowledge to comment. I am not an aviator. What I can tell you, and what our CSG commander mentioned, I think that's really important to take away, and that is, and again, I should have destroyed my bona fides by saying this was my first carrier tour. And so when you know and learn about damage control, at the end of the day, watching that jet move across the flight deck and go into the ocean, and watching the Vincent and Team Broadsword team spring into action was inspiring. And so that's level one, right? So level one, we recovered aircraft 3 hours later. And so if you ever wanted to look for a test case on the resiliency of a U.S. aircraft carrier, 3 hours, jets were back.
I was stationed on the USS Ranger many decades ago with Captain Box and Captain Morse, so that was the issue for my question, but it did not look like it was it looked like it was a jump deck. That's why I'm asking the question.
So it's an F-35C. If I heard you correctly, it's not a F-35 Bravo, which is a jump jet. It was, oh. See, now I'd have to defer to one of the carrier intel officers in the room. You're exceeding my knowledge level. I would tell you the other takeaway, though, and for the group, not only did we recover the jets 3 hours later, But as you've seen in the press and others, we have escorts in the South China Sea, and at the end of the day, they saw that we recovered jets 3 hours later. And I think that is as important as the heroism of the folks on the flight deck, the folks in the medevac crew, and the folks in the air boss shack that got us full flight schedule the next day. Uh-oh.
Good morning, Tony. I'm Tracy Hines. First, I want to, compliment you first on a very successful Information Warfare Commander ride. I did get to witness the collaboration and all the efforts, and it was mind-blowing. Earlier, Admiral Ashback mentioned that you had one witty that was comparable to 12. So can you just tell me why that was so effective, and then what would be the real number that we need moving forward to support the strike groups?
Thank you, Admiral Select. Tracy Hines, everyone. So for Ms. North, she's going to get a preview now of our post-deployment brief, which is not supposed to be unveiled, but witties are very important. And so we had a senior witty. He was our N9, and so that meant he was wearing 05 halfway through deployment. And so, also a guy who could walk into a room and command attention. And so that was part of it. Part of it was personality, and part of it was just when he started talking, people started listening. Now, to your point about how many others, and Admiral Vernazar, somebody from NIW is here, we are growing them younger, and I think that's important because you're going to need to get down to the lieutenant level, as I talked about. You're going to need them at the Desron level, and you're going to need them at the Air Wing level. And I'll even throw the grenade. No one likes the IWC to come back and talk about, I need more manpower. I need one disassociated aviator. Now, that could be conscious bias on my part because first-time carrier officer, but I think having there are so many disassociated CTOR aviators on the carrier anyway. What's one more to be our IW planner? Because the other part of this, and just talking candidly in public, is those three ACOSs, and they're that too. They're my Battle Space Awareness Officer, Integrated Fires Officer, and Assured Command and Control Officer, but they're also the N2, the N6, and the N9. They have day jobs, right? So I think that means is, to quote Harry Met Sally, I think I'm low maintenance, but I'm really high maintenance. But another way of thinking about that is I don't want a staff, but we need someone who can go to those meetings that I, as an 06, probably can't roll into when the N2, the N6, and the N9 are pulled in a different direction. So a witty at the Desron, a witty at the CAG staff, a witty in the IW syndicate, and that's probably good, but flip it on its ear and let's put a disassociated CTOR aviator, maybe, with the IWC. Hope that's okay, Ms. North. You'll see that on the slide in a week. No mas? You already had your one.
Yeah, well, nobody else wanted to talk to you. Hey,
I'm okay with that.
You mentioned the tools you were using to plan, and that intrigued me as well. So the integration tools, hallelujah, I think that's great. Tell me, they certainly didn't supersede mission type orders when you actually went to execution, did they? And can you give an example of how you used them to generate task order, X order, and give me an example where you were the supported commander?
So multifaceted question. So tools in the sense that I mentioned them mostly were battle space awareness tools. So those were things that made jobs easier, made imagery reports faster, made scanning databases. What would take, we were looking at quantitative measurements of, 40 hours to answer an RFI, that when you put it in a pivot table, sort it, and develop a graphic user interface or GUI. And again, so it wasn't quantum computing, but it was something that didn't exist in the fleet beforehand. So that's the first part. What was the second part? So not at that level yet. I would mention publicly RTSO, which does do that, and the fact that we had a spectrum analyzer on part of that, game changer for OFM in a way that you get down to discussions of the radar's off. No, it's not. The radar's off. No, it's not. And to Ms. North's comments yesterday, it was not sailor-proof, it was Rocco-proof. Right? It was Captain Butera-proof. I could monitor the spectrum analyzer in a way that I think teams have not had and rapidly installed. So props to NAVWAR on that one and to I4 to having that for our deployment. But that was helpful. I think I got it. Oh, supported commander. So I'll tell you what, there are collection capabilities in the air wing in the future. Okay? And so, apologize for the SOCOM analogy, but there was a term, where's Chris Nagan? Strike to develop, right? That was a term for SOCOM. We would go out and land on an objective to make sure that we had the network correct, and we knew that a cell phone or a computer. So the same way would be stimulate to dominate. I'm not coining that term here. We were kicking around a bunch. But if you're going to fly into an area where there's peer competitors, there's value there. So EW JAMXs, something you might have done when you were a backseater, those kinds of things where you are in charge of the serial and you're running that organization or running that operation. IO, we can talk about in a different venue. But, and there wasn't, is this the right move? It was just, you're the supported commander. And so I thank guys like you and others in the room that forge that sometimes out of iron, sometimes out of, but I appreciate it. All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.